Hi. Okay, so this is going to be the first official reading of Paper Towns. I'm going to read through the whole prologue, and depending on how long that takes, we may go on. I have a confession to make. This is really going to be really lame, but I haven't actually read Paper Towns before. I know the whole story. I have heard everything about it because I do watch Vlogbrothers like it's my religion, and all of my friends are nerd fighters. And this is for my best friend, or one of my best friends, Maisie Baldwin, who, for her 18th birthday, I'm reading her this book as her birthday present. So this is going to be a journey for the 3 people who do watch my videos, including Maisie. Hopefully more people will join in later. Alright, cool, so let's start. Prologue. The way I figure it, everyone gets a miracle. Like, I'll probably never be struck by lightning, or win a Nobel Prize, or become the dictator of a small nation in the Pacific Islands, or contract terminal ear cancer, or spontaneously combust. But if you consider all the unlikely things together, at least one of them will probably happen to each of us. I could have seen it rain frogs. I could have stepped foot on Mars. I could have been eaten by a whale. I could have married the Queen of England or survived months at sea, but my miracle was different. My miracle is this. Out of all the houses in all the subdivisions in all of Florida, I ended up living next to Margot Roth Spiegelman. Our subdivision, Jefferson Park, used to be a Navy base, but then the Navy didn't need it anymore, so it returned to the land to the citizens of Orlando, Florida, who decided to build a massive subdivision because that's just what Florida does with land. My parents and Margot's parents ended up moving next door to one another just after the first houses were built. Margot and I were 2. Before Jefferson Park was a Pleasantville, and before it was a Navy base, it belonged to an actual Jefferson. This guy, Dr. Jefferson Jefferson. Dr. Jefferson Jefferson has a school named after him in Orlando, and also has a large charitable foundation. But the fascinating and unbelievable but true thing about Dr. Jefferson Jefferson is that he wasn't really any kind of doctor. He was just an orange juice salesman named Jefferson Jefferson. When he became rich and powerful, he went to court and made Jefferson his middle name, and then changed his first name to Doctor, capital D, lowercase r, period. So Margot and I were 9. Our parents were friends, so we could sometimes play together, biking past the cul-de-sac streets to Jefferson Park itself, the hub of our subdivision's wheel. I always got nervous when I heard that Margot was about to show up, on account that she was the most fascinatingly gorgeous creature that God had ever created. On the morning in question, she wore white shorts and a pink t-shirt that featured a green dragon breathing a fire of orange glitter. It's difficult to explain how awesome I found this t-shirt at that time. Margot, as always, bike standing up, her arms locked as she leaned over the handlebars, her purple sneakers in a circuitous blur. It was a steam-hot day in March. The sky was clear, but the air tasted acidic, like it might storm later. At the time, I fancied myself an inventor, and after we locked up our bikes and began the short walk across the park to the playground, I told Margot about an idea I was having for an invention called the Ringolator. The Ringolator was a gigantic cannon that would shoot big colored rocks into a very low orbit, giving Earth the same sort of rings that Saturn has. I still think this would be a good idea, but it turns out that building a cannon that can shoot boulders into low orbit is fairly complicated. I'd been in this park so many times before that it was mapped in my mind, so there were only a few steps inside when I began to sense that the world was out of order, and even though I couldn't immediately figure out what was different. "Quentin," Margot said, quietly and calmly. She was pointing, and I realized what was different. There was a live oak a few feet ahead of us, thick and gnarled and ancient-looking. That was not new. The playground on our right, not new either, but now a guy wearing a gray suit slumped against the trunk of an oak tree, not moving. This was new. He was encircled by blood. A half-dried fountain of it poured out of his mouth. The blood opened in a way that the mouth opened in a way that mouths generally shouldn't be. Flies at rest on his pale forehead. "He's dead," Margot said, as if I couldn't tell. I took 2 small steps backward. I remember thinking that if I made any sudden movements, he might wake up and attack me. Maybe he was a zombie. I knew zombies weren't real, but he sure looked like a potential zombie. As I took these 2 steps, Margot took 2 equally small and quiet steps forward. His eyes are open, she said. "We gotta go home," I said. "I thought you closed your eyes when you died," she said. Margot, we gotta go home and tell. She took another step. She was close enough now to reach out and touch his foot. What do you think happened to him? She asked. Maybe it was drugs or something. I didn't want to leave Margot alone with a dead guy who might be an attack zombie, but I also didn't care to stand around and chat about the circumstances of his demise. I gathered my courage and stepped forward to take her hand. Margot, we gotta go right now. Okay, yeah, she said. We ran to our bikes, my stomach churning with something that felt exactly like excitement, but wasn't. We got on our bikes, and I let her go in front of me because I was crying and I didn't want her to see. I could see the blood on the soles of her purple sneakers. His blood. The dead guy blood. And then we were back home in our separate houses. My parents called 911, and I heard the sirens in the distance, and I asked to see the fire trucks, but my mom said no, and then I took a nap. Both my parents are therapists, which means I'm really goddamn well adjusted. So when I woke up, I had a long conversation with my mom about the cycle of life and how death is a part of life, but not a part of the life that I need to be particularly concerned about at the age of 9. And I felt better. Honestly, I never worried about it that much, which is saying something because I can do some serious worrying. Here's the thing. I found a dead guy, little adorable 9-year-old me, and my even littler and more adorable playdate found a guy with blood pouring out of his mouth, and that blood was on her little adorable sneakers as we biked home. It's all very dramatic and everything, but so what? I didn't know the guy. People I don't know die all the damn time. If I had a nervous breakdown every time something awful happened in the world, I'd be crazier than a shithouse rat. That night, I went into my room at 9 o'clock to go to bed, because 9 o'clock was my bedtime. My mom tucked me in. She told me she loved me, and I said, see you tomorrow. And she said, see you tomorrow. And then turned out the lights and closed the door almost all the way. As I turned on my side, I saw Margot Roth-Spiegelman standing outside my window, her face almost pressed against the screen. I got up and opened the window, but the screen stayed between us, pixelating her. I did an investigation, she said quite seriously. Even up close, the screen broke her face apart, but I could tell that she was holding a little notebook and pencil with teeth marks and the eraser. She glanced down at her notes. Mrs. Feldman, from over on Jefferson Court, said his name was Robert Joyner. She told me he lived on Jefferson Road in one of those condos on top of the grocery store. So I went over there, and there were a bunch of policemen, and one of them asked if I worked at a school paper, and I said our school didn't have a paper, and he said as long as I wasn't a journalist, he would answer all my questions. He said Robert Joyner was 36 years old, a lawyer. They wouldn't let me into the apartment, but a lady named Juanita Alvarez lives next door to him, and I got into her apartment by asking if I could borrow a cup of sugar. And then she said that Robert Joyner had killed himself with a gun, and when I asked why, she told me that he was getting divorced and that he was sad about it. She stopped then, and I just looked at her. Her face was gray and moonlit and split into 1,000 little pieces by the weave of the window screen. Her wide, round eyes slid back and forth from her notebook to me. Lots of people get divorced and don't kill themselves, I said. I know, she said, excitement in her voice. That's what I told Juanita Alvarez. And then she said, Margot flipped a notebook page. She said Mr. Joyner was troubled, and then I asked what that meant, and then she told me that we should just pray for him and that I needed to take the sugar to my mom. And I said forget the sugar, and left. I said nothing again. I just wanted to keep her talking. That small voice tensed with the excitement of almost knowing things, making me feel like something important was happening to me. I think I maybe know why, she said finally. Why? Maybe all the strings inside him broke, she said. While I tried to think of something to say in answer to that, I reached forward and pressed the lock on the screen between us, dislodging it from the window. I placed the screen on the floor, but she didn't give me a chance to speak. Before I could sit back down, she raised her face up towards me and whispered, "Shut the window." So I did. I thought she would leave, but she just stood there watching me. I waved at her and smiled, but her eyes seemed fixed on something behind me, something monstrous that had already drained the blood from her face, and I felt too afraid to turn around and see. But there was nothing behind me, of course, except maybe the dead guy. I stopped waving. My head was level with hers, and we stared at each other from opposite sides of the glass. I don't remember how it ended, if I went to bed or she did. In my memory, it doesn't end. We just stayed there looking at each other forever. Margot always loved mysteries, and everything that came afterward. I could never stop thinking that maybe she loved mysteries so much that she became one.